2 months, no arrest, no confirmed location, no proof of life, and now a ransom note that allegedly tells the family Nancy Guthrie has gone to be with God. A search team quietly scaled back to 15 or 20 investigators and a crime scene that experts say may have been compromised from the very first hours. This is where the case stands today, and what you are about to hear will change how you see everything that has happened since February 1st. I am Michelle. Welcome to the Michelle Report. If you are new here, this channel covers the cases that demand more than a headline, and the Nancy Guthrie disappearance is exactly that kind of case. Subscribe now and turn on notifications. We are not done fighting for answers. To understand where this investigation is right now, you have to go back to the night it all began and look at it through the eyes of someone who has spent decades working crime scenes. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She had lived in her Tucson, Arizona home since the 1970s. Not a transient person, not a confused wanderer, a woman who had deep roots in that neighborhood, who knew every stone in her backyard, who raised her children in that house. Her daughter, Savannah, is one of the most recognized faces in American television, the co-host of NBC's Today Show. And in the early hours of February 1st, someone walked into Nancy's world and took her. What investigators found at the scene, or more accurately, what they did not find, has become one of the most discussed aspects of this entire case. A source close to the investigation, confirmed through on-the-ground reporting, told journalists covering the case that there were no visible signs of an assault inside Nancy Guthrie's home. Some rooms were reportedly described as immaculate. The house was not in disarray. There was no overturned furniture. No obvious struggle had taken place inside. And yet, blood was found on the front steps directly outside her front door. A former detective with the Pima County Sheriff's Office who spent decades on the job explained exactly what that contrast means from an investigative standpoint. The absence of disorder inside does not mean nothing happened. What it likely means, according to his analysis, is that whoever did this came with a plan. They were not there to ransack the home. They were not there to steal jewelry or electronics. They came for one thing and one thing only, Nancy Guthrie herself. And they executed that plan with a level of discipline that left most of the house untouched. The blood on the front steps tells a different story. Based on the pattern described by investigators, drops falling straight down, no directional spatter, no drag marks, the former detective's assessment is that Nancy may still have been on her feet when she reached the front door. She may have been ambulatory, perhaps guided by one or more individuals, and at the threshold, the last moment where the outside world could have seen her, she may have made one final attempt to resist. A blow to the face, a hard fall against the doorframe, something sudden that caused that blood to fall straight down onto the concrete below. That image of an 84-year-old woman fighting back at her own front door is something this family, this community, and this entire country is still sitting with. Here is where the investigation gets complicated and where law enforcement experts have been increasingly willing to go on record with their frustration. The search team has reportedly been reduced to somewhere between 15 and 20 investigators. Authorities have pushed back firmly on the word cold case, insisting the investigation is ongoing. And technically, they are correct. A case is not cold simply because the initial media frenzy has faded. The FBI remains involved. Tips are still being processed. Forensic material collected from the scene is still being analyzed. But the optics are difficult to ignore. 60 days in, with $1 million plus reward on the table, and no public arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed sighting. A former SWAT team leader and law enforcement analyst made a claim on a nationally broadcast podcast that sources with direct knowledge of the investigation described a situation where, at that point in time, there were no identified suspects, not no leads, but no suspects. That distinction matters enormously. Leads are questions waiting to be answered. Suspects are answers you are moving toward. The gap between those two things, after 60 days, is where the public frustration lives. Former FBI agent and cellular analysis expert Scott Eicher, who spent years in federal investigations before transitioning to private forensic work, offered important context in this regard. He pointed out that just because there is no publicly named suspect does not mean the investigation is stalled. A significant portion of the digital evidence, doorbell camera footage, geofencing data, cell tower records takes weeks or even months to be fully processed and returned from the technology companies themselves. Google, Apple, and cellular carriers do not operate on the same timeline as a primetime news cycle. And then there is the forensic genealogy angle. Investigators reportedly recovered biological material from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. If that material contains usable DNA and is entered into genealogical databases, the same approach that cracked decades-old cold cases, including the Golden State Killer investigation, it could eventually produce a family tree lead that breaks this case wide open. But that process takes time. It is methodical. It is quiet, and it does not produce press conferences. The question that criminologists and former investigators keep returning to is this: is the investigation genuinely progressing behind closed doors, or has the volume of initial evidence simply overwhelmed a local department that may not have been fully equipped to handle a case of this magnitude? Before we get into the physical evidence at the scene, the back door, the flower pots, the shoes, we need to talk about something that has been quietly building in the background of this case: the ransom notes. Savannah Guthrie confirmed in her first on-camera interview since her mother's disappearance that ransom communications had been received. She was careful, measured, but the weight of what she was describing was unmistakable. According to her account, the family received what she believed to be genuine ransom demands, not the flood of fake tips and scam communications that a high-profile case like this inevitably attracts. She indicated the family responded. She said clearly the words, "We will pay." Now, according to reporting from multiple outlets, a new ransom note has surfaced, one that contains language claiming Nancy Guthrie has gone to be with God. The implications of that phrase are devastating, and they need to be handled carefully. This is unverified. The authenticity of this note has not been confirmed by official law enforcement sources. Investigators have not publicly addressed this specific communication. And in a case that has already attracted dozens of fraudulent ransom attempts, the possibility that this is another fabrication cannot be dismissed. But criminologists who have worked kidnapping cases note that this type of language, definitively past tense, religiously framed, closing the door on negotiation, follows a pattern seen in cases where the perpetrator is attempting to end contact without confirming what happened. It may be a manipulation. It may be disinformation designed to cause the family to stop pushing. Or it may be something far darker. Criminal defense attorney Mark Garagos, who has represented high-profile defendants in some of the most scrutinized cases in American legal history, offered a perspective that aligns with the broader investigative picture. He suggested that authorities may possess more information than they have publicly revealed, particularly in the area of geofencing and cell tower data. His theory: that investigators may have identified a pattern of cell phone activity near Nancy Guthrie's home across multiple dates, not just the night of the abduction, but weeks earlier, suggesting a surveillance operation that was carefully planned and executed over time. If that is accurate, then what happened to Nancy Guthrie was not random. It was targeted, studied, rehearsed. Two dates have become the focal point of the surveillance phase of this investigation: January 11th and January 24th. January 11th is exactly 3 weeks before Nancy Guthrie disappeared. The Pima County Sheriff's Office, with FBI assistance, began canvassing the neighborhood, specifically asking residents for video footage from that date. The explanation that has slowly emerged involves the Nest camera mounted on Nancy's front door. According to reporting by News Nation's Brian Enton, Google initially indicated that one of the photos captured by that camera was taken on January 11th. Google later walked back that certainty, saying they could not be fully sure of the exact date. But regardless of the metadata question, the image exists, and the figure in it appears to be conducting reconnaissance 3 weeks before the abduction. A former detective who walked the property and viewed the terrain firsthand described the neighborhood as ideal for that kind of pre-operation scouting. Thick brush behind the houses, no streetlights, power lines running overhead creating additional visual cover at night, cactus and desert growth that would make the area almost impossible to navigate without prior knowledge. A neighbor's dog reportedly woke in the night around the time Nancy went missing, staring in the direction of her house, behavior the neighbor described as completely out of character. In law enforcement analysis, that kind of animal behavior is documented as circumstantial evidence. It is not proof, but it is a clue. The emerging picture from multiple reporting sources is that whoever planned this spent significant time, potentially weeks, studying Nancy Guthrie's routines, the arrival and departure times, the layout of the property, the blind spots in the camera coverage, whether she locked her back door, when the lights went off, when the neighborhood went quiet. The former detective from Pima County put it plainly: no forced entry. Backpack full of equipment, dates that suggest a surveillance operation spanning at least 3 weeks. This was not opportunistic crime. This was, in his words, a well-planned and well-executed operation. Whether carried out by a professional or by someone who simply had the patience and obsession to plan it this carefully, the result was the same. Nancy Guthrie was taken, and someone, somewhere, knows exactly how it happened. Let us now look at the physical evidence, because the more closely you examine the details of Nancy Guthrie's home and the crime scene itself, the more questions emerge. The back door. Savannah Guthrie confirmed in her interview that when her sister Annie and Annie's husband Tommaso Cioni arrived at the home that morning, back doors were propped open. Her initial thought, almost heartbreaking in its hopefulness, was that perhaps a medical emergency had occurred, that an ambulance had come, that her mother had been carried out on a stretcher and was somewhere in a hospital, confused but alive. She and Annie began calling local hospitals from New York City, searching for a Nancy Guthrie in any emergency room in Tucson. The hospitals had no record of her. What investigators and analysts have focused on since then is a specific detail: the mechanism used to prop open that back gate. According to reporting, the alleged abductor used one of Nancy's own flower pots to prop open the back gate of her property. That detail, small as it sounds, carries significant investigative weight. Forensic criminologist Dr. Laura Petler, speaking with reporters in the context of this case, explained the methodology through which each object at a crime scene must be studied individually. When an offender interacts with any item at a location, choosing one object over another, moving something, using something as a tool, that choice is a behavioral signature. Why a flower pot and not a rock? Why that flower pot? Does it indicate prior familiarity with the layout of the yard? Does it suggest the individual had scouted the property closely enough to know exactly where the pots were kept? Former law enforcement analysts point out something else. If the back gate was propped open, and the source close to the investigation confirmed that at least one screen or back door was left in a propped open position, that almost certainly means someone was inside the home before Nancy returned from her daughter Annie's house on the night of January 31st. She had visited Annie earlier that evening. An Uber brought her home. The FBI reportedly obtained footage of Nancy inside that Uber, described by some journalists as potentially the last known video of her, taken just hours before she vanished. If the back door was already propped open when she arrived home, then someone had been there, waiting. And the house, according to a source close to the investigation, looked completely normal inside, immaculate in some rooms, as if no one had been there at all. The security door on the front of the house has received far less attention than it deserves. NewsNation correspondent Brian Enton pointed this out directly, and it is a detail that shifts the entire theory of entry. Many homes in the Tucson area, particularly older established homes in quieter neighborhoods, feature a heavy-duty security door mounted in front of the main front door, not a screen door, a reinforced barrier with thick bars designed specifically to make unauthorized entry from the front nearly impossible. Nancy Guthrie's home had one of these doors, which means the figure captured on the Nest camera standing at the front door in the pre-dawn hours of February 1st, backpack visible, appearing to wait, was not someone who had just broken through that front security door to get in. That door, investigators believe, was almost certainly still locked. Which leads to the theory that at least one individual was already inside the house when that figure appeared at the front. Think about that sequence of events. Someone enters through the back, either through an unlocked door, a propped open gate, or a door they had previously disabled. They are inside with Nancy. A second individual, or the same individual in a different role, is positioned at the front. When they bring Nancy to the front door, still on her feet, still moving based on the blood pattern analysis, the front security door is unlocked from the inside. She is guided out. The blood falls straight down at the threshold. The former Pima County detective framed it this way. You have someone stationed inside, another outside, and possibly a third in a vehicle parked down the street. 3 people, at minimum. A coordinated extraction, not a burglary gone wrong, not a random act of violence. A kidnapping operation with defined roles, defined timing, and a defined exit plan. Former FBI investigators who have reviewed the publicly available details have noted that the absence of a vehicle in Nancy's driveway is itself significant. Whoever took her did not park in front of the house. They parked elsewhere, possibly blocks away, and walked to the property, which means the entire operation was designed to minimize the chance of a license plate capture. Whoever did this had thought through the surveillance blind spots in that neighborhood very carefully. The evidence question, what was collected, what was missed, and what may now be gone forever, is where the sharpest criticism of the official response lands. Forensic professor Joe Scott Morgan, who has spent decades training investigators in the science of crime scene analysis, was direct in his assessment. The crime scene at Nancy Guthrie's home was not properly secured in those critical first hours. Evidence that may have existed, footprints and dust that can be pulled using electrostatic imaging, biological material on doorway rugs, trace evidence on door frames and doorknobs was potentially degraded or destroyed before it could be properly collected and preserved. He pointed specifically to the doormat on the front porch. The suspect, as visible in the Nest camera footage, walked directly across that mat multiple times. If there was blood deposition on the exterior of the house, it is statistically likely there was also blood deposition on that mat, and potentially just inside the threshold as well. The kind of biological evidence that, under proper forensic conditions, could provide DNA, could tie a specific individual to that specific location on that specific night. But if the mat was not collected in the first hours, if investigators walked through the scene without securing that material, if the area was accessed by multiple people before forensic teams had a chance to document and collect everything in a controlled sequence, then that evidence may be gone.
Nancy Grace, the veteran prosecutor and crime victims advocate who covered this case extensively, made the same point with particular force.
She described the crime scene handling as a fundamental failure, one that, depending on how severely the evidence was compromised, could affect not just the investigation, but the eventual prosecution whenever that day comes. Defense attorneys in a trial would not need to prove innocence. They would only need to plant doubt about how the crime scene was managed. And doubt, once planted in the mind of even one juror, can unravel a case. Susanna Ryan, a forensic DNA analyst with more than 25 years of experience, offered a counterpoint worth holding on to. Even in imperfectly preserved crime scenes, DNA can survive. hair, skin cells, saliva. The body sheds biological material constantly. Steering wheels, door handles, the back gate, the flower pot used to prop it open. Every surface that the perpetrators touched is a potential DNA repository. And if usable genetic material was collected and entered into genealogical databases, the science may ultimately deliver what the initial investigation failed to secure through conventional means. The former FBI agent involved in analyzing cell phone data from major investigations put the broader picture plainly. The technology now available to federal investigators, geofencing, tower triangulation, satellite imaging where available, genealogical DNA, represents a generation of forensic capability that did not exist when most of these investigators first entered law enforcement. Cases that would have gone cold 20 years ago can now be cracked through a single stored genetic profile. If the perpetrators of Nancy Guthrie's abduction left any biological material at that scene, and the probability that they did not is extremely low, the investigation still has a path forward. There is a thread running through all of the witness accounts, the neighbor observations, the investigative theories, and it leads back to a single word: professional. Not professional in the sense of trained operatives or career criminals with organized crime connections, though that cannot be ruled out. Professional in the operational sense: disciplined, patient, careful. The geofencing evidence, if it exists, as multiple analysts believe it does, shows a pattern of presence at or near Nancy Guthrie's home across multiple dates over at least 3 weeks. The backpack found visible in the front door footage was described by investigators as fully packed, not a casual bag, but what the former detective bluntly called a kidnapping kit. The choice to enter through the back, the decision to prop open the gate using an object already present at the scene rather than bringing a tool, the decision not to park in front of the house, the execution of the abduction in a way that left the interior of the home almost entirely undisturbed. Each of these decisions, taken individually, could reflect luck or improvisation. Taken together, they reflect planning. Former law enforcement analysts have repeatedly noted that the longer a case like this goes without resolution, the more the initial theories about the perpetrator's sophistication tend to shift. Early in the investigation, several experts described the suspect, based on the visible footage of the figure at the front door, as possibly clumsy or amateur. The gun appeared to be visible in the recording. The individual seemed to be handling the situation imperfectly. But 2 months in, with no arrest, no credible identification, and no confirmed sighting of Nancy Guthrie, the consensus has shifted. Whether this was truly professional or whether it was the combination of careful planning and extraordinary luck, the outcome so far has been the same. They have not been caught. The $1 million plus reward, analysts point out, is both a pressure point and a complication. On one hand, it dramatically increases the incentive for anyone with even peripheral knowledge to come forward. On the other hand, the former detective who walked the property raised a scenario that has not been widely discussed: the possibility that the person or persons responsible may be eliminating that risk proactively. In cases involving multiple co-conspirators, the one holding the most information is simultaneously the most valuable and the most dangerous. And the one holding the most to lose from exposure may not wait for a partner to make that decision. It is a dark calculus, but in the history of criminal investigations, it is not unprecedented. Savannah Guthrie's Today Show return replaced professional poise with raw maternal grief. She revealed the agonizing physical reality of her 84-year-old mother, frail, in pajamas, and barely mobile, contrasted against the cold calculation of her abductors. The interview's most shattering moment was Savannah's public apology. "Mommy, I'm sorry." She fears her own fame turned her mother into a target, a sentiment her brother Cameron analytically confirmed as a likely factor for a ransom-motivated crime. As Nancy Grace noted, this animal instinct of guilt is the most insidious shadow of violent crime. Savannah didn't create this danger by being successful, but grief rarely listens to logic. The investigation remains active through several critical yet quiet threads. Detectives have narrowed their vehicle search to a white van and a gray or silver SUV or pickup, highlighted by the towing of a Range Rover and surveillance reviews at a nearby Circle K. Simultaneously, a deep dive into contractors, including electricians and HVAC workers who recently serviced the home, aims to identify anyone with intimate knowledge of the property's layout. Investigators are currently comparing DNA swabs from these individuals against biological evidence recovered from the scene. Technological avenues also remain a priority. Following precedents like the Rittenhouse case, officials have pursued satellite and infrared imagery from the Tucson area, though any findings stay classified. Perhaps most haunting is the digital evidence from Nancy's pacemaker. Its Bluetooth connection to her phone abruptly severed at 2:28 a.m. on February 1st. This precise timestamp marks the exact moment she vanished from the digital world, leaving only silence in its wake. 60 days later, despite a $1 million reward and exhaustive forensic processing, Nancy Guthrie has not been found. Criminologists and victim advocates emphasize a harsh reality often overlooked by the news cycle. For the families of the missing, there is no closure, only the ambiguous loss that stalls the grieving process. While the public follows the investigation through headlines, families like the Guthries endure a unique psychological torture, eating meals at empty chairs and fielding questions long after the world has moved on. News Nation reports that other families of the long-term missing saw their own reflections in Savannah Guthrie's face, the agonizing tug of war between painful hope and the mind's refusal to accept the worst. The family's statement at day 50, "We cannot grieve, we can only ache and wonder," strips away the forensic data to reveal the raw human wound at the heart of this case. It is a reminder that until there are definitive answers, the healing cannot even begin. Here is where this case stands as of today, and here is what the evidence taken together suggests. Nancy Guthrie was not taken randomly. The surveillance of her home began at least 3 weeks before the abduction, possibly longer. Whoever did this knew the neighborhood, knew the property layout, knew the camera positions, and knew enough about her routine to time the operation for the early morning hours when the street was darkest and the neighbors least likely to notice anything unusual. They entered through the back. They propped open the gate using objects already present on the property. They left the interior of the home immaculate because they had not come to destroy anything. They had come to take one person. The blood at the front door tells us she fought back at the threshold. The pacemaker timestamp tells us the operation was over before 3 a.m. The geofencing data, if it exists, as analysts believe, may eventually tell us who was there and when. The DNA collected from the scene, the work orders for the contractors who had access to the property, the vehicle surveillance from the surrounding area, all of it is being worked. Former investigators and forensic experts are consistent on one point. These cases do break. Not always on the timeline the public expects. Not always through the evidence path anyone predicted. But someone knows something. Someone was seen. Someone drove a vehicle. Someone made a phone call. Someone talked to someone who talked to someone else. The reward stands at over $1 million. The FBI tip line is 1-800-CALL-FBI. Anonymous tips can be submitted through local channels. And the family, Savannah, Annie, Cameron, is still asking, still fighting, still waiting for the person in this country who has the piece of information that changes everything to come forward. Nancy Guthrie was taken from the home she lived in for over 50 years. She deserves to be found. Her family deserves to know what happened. And the person or persons responsible deserve to face what they have done in a court of law, in front of a jury, with the full weight of American justice bearing down on them. This case is not over. If you found this video valuable, if it helped you understand what is actually happening in this investigation beneath the surface, please share it with someone who's following this case. Hit the like button. It helps more people find this channel and stay informed on the stories that matter. And if you are not yet subscribed to the Michelle Report, now is the time. We do not let these stories fade. We stay until there are answers. I am Michelle. This is the Michelle Report. Thank you for watching.